First up, without further ado, it's time for me to call upon our session chair. Somebody who's got over 15 years of experience undertaking real estate valuation and advisory across India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. He's led teams for valuation and advisory engagements and has consulted for Smart City Projects Transport Node Modernization Program under the Ministry of Transportation, Airport, Landslide Development, and much more. We're talking about the Managing Director, Valuation Services of Colliers, India, Mr. Ajay Sharma. Let's welcome Ajay with a warm, warm round of applause. Thank you so much, Ajay, for giving us your valuable time and helping us to curate this discussion forward. Well, next up is somebody who's a seasoned professional in private equity real estate with over 14 plus years of experience. He has a comprehensive understanding of the entire cycle of fund and investment management across all major real estate asset classes. Somebody who brings a unique perspective to real estate investing. We're talking about the head investments of Godrej Fund Management, Girish Singhi. Let's give Girish a warm, warm round of applause. Girish, thank you so much for joining us today. Next up is somebody who's a seasoned professional with extensive experience in managing real estate portfolios and sales operations. He brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to lead and grow the company's portfolio of properties. We're talking about the Chief Business Officer, Smartworks, Pratik Agarwal. Thank you so much, Pratik, for joining us. Next up, somebody who's been a key architect in transforming Tata Realty, becoming a pioneer in real estate sector. He's responsible for directing Tata Realty's business vision and managing the business operations with the overarching strategic planning as well as execution. Well, with over 30 plus years of experience in real estate sector, we're talking about none other than the MD and CEO of Tata Realty and Infrastructure Limited and Tata Housing Development Company Limited, Sanjay Dutt. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining us today. Next up, somebody joining us who has over 20 years of experience working with infrastructure, real estate, technology, and media companies for tax and regulatory matters. Her areas of expertise include investment acquisition structuring, distressed asset acquisition, capital restructuring, cash extraction strategies, and reorganization. We're talking about the partner real estate and REITs industry leader, Grant Thornton, Bharat, Shabala, Shinde. Thank you, Shabala, for joining us. And next up is somebody who's responsible for all facets of the company's investor relations, FP&A, along with the responsibility of sales, marketing, real estate, acquisition, fundraising, and strategy. He joined Awfis at the time of its inception in 2015 as a part of the core management team. We're talking about Deputy CEO, Office Space Solutions, Sumit Lakhani. Sumit along with the moderator right there. All right, so with that, Ajay, over to you to take it forward. Can we get Ajay's mic on, please?
Hello. No, fine. Thank you for the lovely introduction. So today we have the who is who of the industry sitting on the panel with a wide array of experience. Before getting into the topic of the panel, I'd just like to set some context to the topic that we're discussing largely on the commercial real estate. So a few pointers for the larger audience as to where the commercial real estate today in India is. So today, the total grade A commercial real estate stock in India is upward roughly 690 million square feet. And this year, up to quarter three, we have seen 38 million square feet being absorbed already. This is the gross absorption. Bengaluru and Delhi basically lead the overall leasing activity across India. We are seeing demand more from a broad-based sectors. So we are seeing demand not just being focused on the traditional sector of IT, ITS, but largely from manufacturing. We are looking at from flex spaces. We are looking at from R&D. We are looking at from BFSI. And interestingly, a very dependent sector, which was looking on the external growth of companies from US and Europe to drive the commercial demand in India. Today, India is actually poised very well with the domestic demand picking up and domestic players determining the demand. Vacancy has been largely range bound. In spite of the issues that we are seeing in the Western world today, India has been well poised in terms of the commercial real estate. We're also seeing that the leasing activity for the third quarter has been significantly higher on a year-on-year basis. The first two quarters were of a sort of a concern, but I think it's bouncing back. Like I said, we're just down 5% from last year's gross absorption on a Q3 basis, YTD. So we are looking at that we might end up somewhere close to last year's absorption numbers. The other part is that we officially have 3 commercial REITs that have been listed, doing very well. And they have about 78.5 million square feet of stock. So that's a great thing. And that's roughly about the 11% of the stock that we are talking about today in the Grade A space. Then also, Bangalore, Delhi, and Mumbai account for almost 56% of the REIT stock. Now, going by just the REITs and the amount of REITs that are going to come up, especially with, I think, 3 more REITs are likely to come up on the office space side, we are looking at roughly about 380 million square feet of REITable space that's available in India. So the commercial sector as such is doing very well. So I would say that it's good news for the IPC world. It is good news for the developers and occupiers. But I think we cannot ignore the issues that are plaguing the Western world and what the trickle-down effect could be on Indian real estate. So that's the reason why today we are going to talk very specifically about adaptable and risk-averse investment in commercial real estate. So the first module on which we are basically going to talk about is how investors perceive globally about commercial real estate in current times, which can then kind of open out to the panel to give their thoughts on that. So I'm just giving a couple of points. So an European survey for the real estate investors, they showed that interest rate policy, inflation, and denominator effect in the markets are the critical aspects for investments. The current geopolitical issues, we had the Ukraine war, now the escalating Gaza conflict, these are becoming increasingly points of concern for pushing investments. And also, it is moving the strategy to core investment strategy that is more stabilized assets in terms of investments. More shift for funds is happening. The previous panel was talking about equity capital, but now most of the funds are saying they would like to go into debt-based funding. So that's happening. Inflation hedge ability has become very, very important. I think inflation is a global phenomenon that we are seeing. A lot of central banks trying to figure out how they can control the runaway inflation. Non-listed real estate debt vehicles have become the preferred choice of investments into multiple geographies. And 60% of the investors who are currently there want an increased exposure to debt funds. So this is on a European side. On the US side, what we are seeing is almost 86% of the investors are actually having a very bearish outlook to commercial real estate. We've all read news of how even the marquee funds in the SPVs have failed to service the debt obligations in US, and which has led to some, very difficult situation there. 46% of the respondents had said that the interest rate hike by Fed is completely changing their strategy of how they invest into commercial real estate. 20% have said that lack of availability of quality debt is a concern. 15% of the respondents have said recession risk is a single important factor for them. And 98% have said that challenges to refinance the existing debt. That is the single most important concern for them. So given all this, unfortunately, the Western world is having a problem, but in the APAC region, the investment has actually gone up, and it has gone up by almost 200 basis points since last year. So which means a lot of capital is coming into this particular geography. So with that a little bit, I would like the first response from Sanjay. Uh, Sanjay, you have been in this industry for the longest period of time. You worked on multiple roles as advisor, as a transaction advisor, and now, of course, in the development side. From 2000s to now, we have seen a significant change in how commercial real estate has come across, right? So what are these changes? I mean, today we're talking about community workspaces from a traditional core real estate that we were talking about. What are the key factors and how is the commercial real estate being reimagined?
Let me focus on the demand side first. So demand has really evolved in office. Traditionally, over the 2-decade journey, we saw cost arbitrage led demand and very little domestic consumption. So there was a time when American companies and European companies used to contribute 75% of the demand in office in India.
Right.
It's American companies are now down to 50%.
Right.
There was a time when IT sector used to have 70% of the demand. IT sector is now 45%.
Right.
Which means the non-IT, although we continue to build IT parks, but the demand is non-IT.
Correct.
So pharmaceutical, health sector, e-commerce, etc. have come in on a large scale. So which is a good thing. In a way, it has de-risked from a developer investor point of view. The standards in office has, in terms of space allocation, has become extremely tight. It used to be 125 to 150 square feet per person. It's come down to 75 to 80, and now probably some would go back to 100 given the COVID situation, etc., etc. So when it comes to demand for office for a company, it has come down in a business. However, the growth of the business has replaced this because companies have grown in scale.
Right.
They've taken more space, but in the past, if they were to take 100,000, they're taking 50,000. So that's a big shift. The other factor which has impacted is earlier there were only certain sectors which were cost linked. Now the innovation, R&D, GCC.
Correct.
The GCCs right now is the biggest story in India. These are captive centers and not third party. And it has a huge implication on the economy because they're able to afford more in comparison to third party. They're able to pay better salaries, so disposable income is going to go up if you look at the other impact of such demand. And the behavior in terms of retail, hospitality, everything is kind of going through a big change. So that is one fundamental change. I feel given the growth of certain sectors and the Indian companies, which you mentioned briefly, we will continue to see 35 to 40 million square feet net absorption at least for next 7 to 8 years.
Oh, okay.
Consistently, with some ups and downs, should there be such global events such as COVID, etc. So that's what we believe. On the investor side, they've lost the appetite for investment in the current year because of headwinds and issues globally. And they've been very careful. While REITs have done well, you mentioned it, but there is stress. And it's largely because we have a very large percentage of the 700 million square feet, which is roughly 200 million square feet, SEZs.
That's right.
So SEZs have nearly 40 million square feet of vacant space. And we all are anxiously waiting for changes in the policy, which will allow domestic tariff companies to work, which should happen any day, but we've been saying that for last 3 years. So, any day or any year, that could be the story. But I'm hopeful that it'll happen.
Yeah, we will be touching upon that, by the way,
Yeah.
during the course of our discussion.
Yes. So, but I do believe that there is an opportunity for certain investors who are late to the opportunity
Right.
to seize the opportunity right now, because effective now, I've already seen initial bounce in the office, but it'll be more visible next year in the H2 when you will see GCCs and the Indian companies together. For the
Right.
first time, we'll see a shortfall in supply for grade A.
Oh, okay.
Overall supply and vacancy, by the way, will remain 20%.
Right.
But I think, you know, quality and relevant supply in key markets will
Sure.
remain tight. The other side, of course, is, you know, co-working, flexi space, hybrid is for here to stay,
Right.
and it'll grow very well.
Right.
But it will only bring more variety and options and choices to the customer.
Sure. So I think on that note, it's a very positive note. I think for the larger audience here, that if you're saying that we continue to grow in commercial real estate in India, it's a quite a optimistic statement, and we sure hope it happens, at least from an IPC perspective. We sure hope it happens, and from developer perspective too. But on that note, that the Indian companies have driven the demand, right? I would like to come to the flex space. Pratik, to you. You guys have been one of the biggest contributors to the demand drive that's been happening in the last couple of years since the opening up of the entire restrictions after COVID. And one of the other things that we want to mention is how the entire shift in the you know, the way the office culture is undergoing, especially, be it large organizations or small organizations, with a lot of focus on community space and all. So there has been a journey that has happened for the co-working spaces. So from being a collaborative space, they went to a community space, and from a community space today, we are also talking about hosting virtual spaces, enabling businesses, right? So there's been this entire journey that has happened. So how do you think these will address the evolving requirements? Are we already there on the top of the curve, or still you think there's a way to go? And how will this impact the investment to CRE?
Sure. Thank you, Ajay. I think, honestly, co-working in India has truly, come of age. The relationship between workers and workplaces has evolved as employees demand more from their workplaces, and occupiers, continue to revitalize their offices. Flex operators have emerged as a strong partner. I think flexible offices has carved out a niche for itself in the last couple of years. Today it is a strategic imperative for occupiers as a part of their real estate portfolio planning.
That's right.
This segment has transformed into a crucial segment of the office market with a variety of offerings that are now considered as strategic business solutions by the occupier community. Since the onset of the pandemic, many occupiers have felt the need to manage risks resulting from changes in business or economic situations, and to convert their real estate into a more agile one. The need for higher employee engagement, flexibility in leases, hybrid working models, flexibility to scale up or down are some of the reasons why occupiers today choose flexible operators. From an operational footprint of, I think, under 20 million in 2018, today the industry has grown 3x and is on the way to grow and double its footprint, crossing about 100 million square feet in the next 5 years in the top 9 cities. I think today flex space is more mainstream than ever.
Right.
It is not a result of an afterthought anymore or a short-term tactical decision. Global occupiers have seen the advantages that flexible workspace solutions have brought to them, not only on a real estate level, but a positive impact on overall business.
Thank you, Pratik, for that. So from one flex operator to another, Sumit, prop tech is the buzzword when it comes to flex space. So a lot of integration of prop tech is happening, and in fact, you're driving the evolution of even BIM in the real estate by the needs of your occupants, right? How is this realigning the investment requirements from your portfolio perspective, and how are you imposing that on the developers? So what's happening there?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So with respect to the prop tech, the way we look at it is primarily it's the tech enablement across listings, across property management, marketing, customer experience. These are the kind of key areas across prop tech.
Right.
Over the last 5 years, what we see is the phase one of prop tech is completely executed, and primarily in the area of property management. In the overall co-working scheme, we probably, a couple of flex operators probably led the way around on implementing PropTech solutions.
Right.
And to an extent, we joke around that we may also start turning into a PropTech company on our own, right? Because a couple of us have got such a great solutions that we can, white label them and, give it to other occupiers as well.
Right.
Now, about 50 odd million square feet of co-working industry, we are a pure, user of PropTech. In terms of the developers, what we see is all the buildings which have come across after 2008 or 2010, or with respect to larger organized developers, those developers have been enabling, PropTech solutions across their buildings. With respect to this other buildings, there I would say that's a big opportunity for the PropTech players, and that's where the massive investments will primarily, go across.
So just to continue with that, Sumit, is because we said the concept is adaptable commercial real estate. So you driving this PropTech requirements into the commercial real estate when you are leasing space from a developer. How do you see the space or the environment created already, the built environment is adaptable? And are you forcing some changes, and are you seeing that the previous discussions you have been having with most of these developers are now being enforced in the newer projects, which is making it much more easier for your flex space operators to occupy?
So, Ajay, the reality is a lot of buildings in the portfolio are multi-tenanted buildings where we as a tenant have a limited say.
Right.
But the standalone buildings are the ones where we are able to drive a lot of changes. And what we see is a lot of occupiers are becoming, are asking it on a very regular basis, the kind of BIM, the kind of, energy efficiency enabling systems which are there in the buildings. And that's, driving the overall change. So we are able to move the needle, influence, but in a limited manner.
Sure. So now moving on from a PropTech space, I did mention that a lot of investments now are coming through the non-listed space. So Shabala, I wanted to understand that the successful listing and performance of the REITs in India have opened floodgates of various investments. So a lot of investment vehicles are being floated around. But like I said, the preference is for more from a non-listed investment vehicle. How do you see this moving in the next 5 years, and how you think that will change the overall landscape for the commercial real estate?
Oh, sure. No, yeah, I think in last couple of years, you definitely seen quite a bit of investment happening, most of them happening at a platform level as well. The assets that you're seeing where these investments is happening is also slightly more than office. You see warehouses, you see data centers, so newer asset classes are coming in. Having said that, from a REIT perspective, I think that's what you're looking at key. When there's a REIT-like investment, 3 REITs have done so well, there's a 4th in the retail. Why are we not seeing more REITs? So REITs as an investment vehicle, I think 2 or 3 peculiar things that come. One is it needs an asset size of 500 crores. 2, it has to be a revenue generating operating asset. And one of the key requirements is that you need to be able to upstream cash from the SPVs to the REIT and then to the investors. So when you look at these peculiar characteristics, it needs some kind of a groundwork to ensure that you have a right structure in place, the portfolio of assets that you need to have, the capital structure to enable an efficient cash upstream. So it takes time to reach that stage.
Okay.
And the kind of investments that have happened now and the investors that you see are private equity players. You've seen a lot of domestic investors also in their family offices. And even pension funds and sovereign funds. So these are funds at some point in time will look for an exit or look for a investment structure that allows them to get a steady return, especially pension funds and sovereign funds. So
Right.
they're long-term investors with a steady return. So what you're looking, it's seen in the last couple of years, maybe it's a groundwork,
Okay.
and in the next few years you'll see some of these assets moving under a rate, and the aside of the office, whatever assets you see, they are all assets which can go under a rate.
Correct.
So maybe next 5 years you'll see more rates coming in, and if I had to add that and compare it with what you've seen in the other markets where rates have been in place, say for example US. You had the first rate in US in 60s.
Right.
Today they have the they have the largest number of rates. The market cap is around $1,100 billion. Singapore, for example, is 77.
Yeah.
And India today we are at $88 billion with 5 years of operational rates. So I think, and like you said, Sanjay, there's enough for next 5 years to grow. And the kind of office space that we are expecting, definitely these are assets where you'll see coming under a rate and rates moving forward.
Right. So just to continue on what Shabala said, the US REIT market is almost 35 times the market currently in India is. So we have close to about 11,300 million square feet of REITs in the US under multiple strategies, not just the core commercial real estate, but even the non-core commercial real estate part of it. Moving on to Girish, so we were talking about the REITs. So today REITs focus largely on core or core plus kind of investments. So basically stabilized and to some extent developable assets kind of a thing. But with the yields tapering because of the growing interest rates and other things, how do you see the long-term strategy will be for investments in the REITable assets?
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll answer that question, but I'd just like to touch upon what Ajay and Sanjay said. When we're talking about the stress of commercial real estate and we compare it with the US, let's understand that the context of interest rate movement from a 2% to a 6% versus 7 to 9% is very different. So the stress is much less in India. You try to occupy a space in BKC, you won't get none. Secondly, the leverage also in India is less. It's about 50-60%. They're highly levered, 70 to 80%, which is why their equity value is wiped out. So when we compare, we must set the context of the stress level of commercial real estate. Now, coming to REITable assets, and especially core and core plus, I think there are 3-4 very important criteria one must understand to develop the investment strategy. The first being the location. Real estate has not changed beyond in the last 20 years. Locations plays a critical role. And by location, I don't mean which city. It means that which micro market you're focusing on. And what are the characteristics in terms of supply, demand, rental growth, vacancies, etc. In fact, what we have done in our firm is that we no longer say cities. We say which micro markets. And we classify those micro markets in either it's a nascent micro market, either it's an emerging micro market, whether it's a peak performance, or it's a mature micro market. Basis the micro market classification, you can define an investment strategy. The second comes the product. What are you going to make? Because today, getting people to office has become so difficult. And unlike the days of the past that you make office in any location and people will come. So the product becomes very important. And from the product perspective, how do you design the product? How efficient is your floor plate? How divisible it is? What are the operating efficiencies you are bringing in? How much time it takes for somebody to enter your office to come to his sitting place? So all those play a very critical role. And last being what risk you are taking and what returns you are actually underwriting. For example, some locations will never sell. Some locations will always sell. So getting the right location, getting the right underwriting, because look, a COVID thing can happen once again. So are you able to stress test your asset? Are you able to build in enough resilience to build no rent scenarios for many years? That is how you'll have to define an investment strategy.
Right. So Sanjay, Girish said the most important aspect of coming down from location again to a micro market perspective determines how the investment is carried out, the strategy of investment happens. But as a person who has been leading a development company with so many occupants, what has been the single most important infrastructural change you have undertaken in your projects, or even that you see around in your competition, that has been driven either by investors or by the occupants, and that has defined the way the CRE development has happened?
So India has 58 micro markets in top 8 cities. In these 58 micro markets, when I say micro market means Bandra Kurla is one micro market, Lopur is another. Only 18 micro markets are most prominent.
Right.
They consume roughly about 85% of India's leasing. And they're obviously the top highest micro markets. The reason why they became top micro markets were the closest to talent,
Right.
transportation, and social and other infrastructure developed by the private developers. Government actually had none of those, except starting Hinjewadi and Mape, but never did anything subsequently. Today, the most defining aspect is the environment,
Right.
metro connectivity, because across the country, the last mile connectivity has become a big issue. Bombay has over 300 kilometers under execution. So they're opening up corridors in the same micro markets where tenants will find, being able to bring their employees with less stress on time and commuting.
Right.
So it's a fundamental thing. The other thing is almost all corporates want to be in development which will be net carbon zero.
Okay.
So which basically means we'll have to use 100% of the energy consumption through renewable sources. So solar and wind, and not unfortunately all states are equipped with it.
Right.
So the developers like us will have to then buy credits to replace wherever we need to, because we will, as a developer, we will not qualify to participate in the RFP
Right.
if we don't guarantee that.
Okay.
So that's a big change
Right.
from infrastructure and overall point of view.
So the adaptable piece being that you become more sustainable in terms of the built environment. So that's been driving the change. Well, now coming, so one of the important things that Sanjay was explaining was that last mile connectivity, and I will take that a little more broad-based into supply chain, right? Flex spaces, you operate on certain margins, right? But given the kind of risks that are running around, the geopolitical risks and also the fiscal risks that are there, how it's impacting the supply chain, and then the subsequent impact on your margins. So how are you dealing with this?
We are able to reduce costs because of our sheer economies of scale, right? There are 4 major components that sum up your real estate cost today. Your rental, your maintenance, your capital expenditure, and your operational expenditure. Flexible providers like us, we leverage our scale to reduce the cost of each of these components. It starts with the space acquisition first. Because we're negotiating for a larger volume with the developer, like our average size today is roughly about 3 lakh square feet. We are able to get slightly better rentals than a conventional client, probably negotiating for about 40,000 square feet. Then comes your common area maintenance and your operational expenditure. I'll take both of that together. We've backward integrated this, right? So we have our own blue collar company that manages all the properties that we occupy. We take over the maintenance of all the buildings that we operate. Right. And they also do the facility management inside the offices. Because of this, we are able to standardize the experience for our members across the 13 cities that we operate in, and also reduce the cost considerably. Technology plays a pivotal role as well. We leverage technology, which is again a proprietary solution for us, made by our in-house tech teams to enhance efficiencies and reduce operational expenditure. Lastly, it's your capital expenditure.
Right.
So I think about 80-85% of all the items that actually go into your office fit-outs is
Right.
pretty much the same for all enterprises, right? It doesn't change. Things like your raised flooring, things like your air conditioning, things like your UPS, panels, glass partitions, this is all standard, right? The balance 10-15% look and feel, colors are different for different companies. So what we've done is we've gone ahead and standardized that 80-85% directly with the manufacturers and gotten rate contracts because of, again, our sheer volume. We're delivering about 2.5 lakh square feet or so every single month. And we are able to reduce our cost of capital expenditure to at least about 40-45% compared to anybody else doing it themselves. So I think all these 4 components put together, that's how we're able to
So one key
retain our margin.
takeaway I see for the developer community is the ability to, negotiate well on rentals and pull them back, so you can manage the margins better, because the other places you really don't have much to say because it's external to you, right? So I think that's a big contributor. So going to an investor, Girish, from what I'm understanding from the occupier side is that this is going to happen. A lot of rent pressures are going to come in, and it will continue to be there because they continue to be the large space occupiers. How is the operational efficiency becoming very important in order to better, the realizations from a property in order to either meet the mortgage requirements or, returns that they have to pay for investors? So when you see this as an investor, because you have an office fund, when you're investing, how do you kind of, judge these metrics?
No, it's a great question, and it's a question we think about it quite often, because previously we never thought of real estate as a service. We used to think it's an asset class. You get a good building and get a long-term tenant and you lease it and that's about it. But now it's totally different. Now it's totally about what amenities can you provide in a building, be it a creche, be it a shuttle service, what other services you can provide. So those have become really a game changer. And as Sanjay was mentioning on ESG, that has really, really changed the game. It is no longer a hygiene factor. It's almost, it's no longer a luxury or it's a good to have, it's a hygiene factor. And in fact, a lot of stats are there which clearly demonstrate the economic benefits of having a green building. But right from your chiller efficiency to your electrical consumption to your annual maintenance bill to how you're running the equipments, how you're running the plant rooms, they become really, really important. Because look, essentially you're making 3 decisions. One, of course, is a buy. That you can control by choosing a right location, by getting cherry picking the right set of deals, getting access to proprietary deals. And then, of course, exit piece is also sorted out because now the capital markets are pretty mature. But the middle piece is in terms of how do you create value, or how do you enhance value. And that only can come through 3-4 things, right? Either you enhance your rentals, you provide some additional services, additional revenue streams, or you cut down on costs. Or you provide additional services, or you do something which actually enhances the tenant's value. For example, even today, when we were actually trying to greening the real estate assets, right? Even today, our grid is mostly coal or non-renewable. And you could still go to 50% of common areas as cleaner fuels. But how do you get tenants to actually invest and get cleaner source of energy? That is the problem which we're solving. But I think the tenants are actually quite keen. And they also understand as a long-term user, the operational cost actually reduces if you move from a non-green to a cleaner source of energy.
Right. Sumit, operational efficiencies again coming into play. So I'm looking from a flex place operator. So 63% of the firms in a recent report that we released, Colliers, we saw that firms are very flexible for hybrid workspace, right? So which means a lot of people are looking at tier 2 as an option to go and work. And I also understand flex space operators are really looking at tier 2 cities. Now, the cost arbitrage in terms of the rentals that you're getting, right? Is that playing an important role, and how is it looking for you, for your investors, when you are foraying into tier 2 cities?
So I'll just answer in 2 parts. The first around on operational efficiency, more from a perspective of tier 1 and tier 2. The way we look at it is when things are down, when the world is going a bit slow, there's uncertainty, people prefer more flexibility, and so the demand for flex spaces will always be higher. Now, one of the things we have realized in terms of creating value apart from the economies of scale is pick up buildings which are weak. Let's say there are 10 micro markets in India which have lower than 5% kind of vacancies. Right. Now, in those micro markets, there is limited or no supply coming up. But there are still a lot of buildings which can be upgraded and built to a scenario. So we try picking up those buildings and create a green story out of them and create a great asset. And the margins we end up making over there by the value creation becomes humongous. Now, coming to, with respect to tier 2 cities, we are extraordinarily optimistic around on tier 2 cities. No country can grow with, urbanization will not only happen in the top 8 metros. It's going to happen across, another 15 tier 2 cities. Almost about 1 million square feet of our portfolio is across these tier 2 cities, and we see demand across multiple frontiers. One is the local business. Second is, any company which is operating in India, let's say, GT is over here, they would also need to have an office in Indore and an office in Ahmedabad. Ultimately, and it's a regional office, so they would prefer to work it through a, so that's the second kind of a demand. And companies like Zomato, Paytm, that. The third is, which becomes very interesting with COVID and hybrid work culture, is the war for talent. And going near to the talent, the IT services companies started experimenting, going closer to this talent in tier 2 cities. We worked with a Fortune 500 IT company and probably are catering to almost about 0.3 million square feet across 4 tier 2 cities now. And we're seeing this trend happening in that. Now coming to the last part on cost arbitrage. On real estate side, my sense is genuinely there is no cost arbitrage. I'll explain why. The kind of supply which is available in tier 2 cities, it's very limited. And the kind of compliant supply. You go to a city like Jaipur, I mean, you will be struggling really to find a really compliant building which would meet the standard of, any kind of large IT services company. It's tough. So the kind of rentals which you get over there is equivalent to kind of rentals which you get at Navi Mumbai. So they are sub-dollar, but closer to, and the dollar has been, rising. So in terms of the overall real estate cost for end occupants, it's not low. It's a bit okay as compared to, let's say, a peripheral city like Thane and Navi Mumbai. But in terms of the talent cost is what the major saving is coming around for most of these, occupiers.
Okay, so the internal requirements of the occupiers is actually pushing you to foray into newer areas. With this, I'll actually come to you, Shabala, again, is that we were talking about the push to tier 2 cities. And Sanjay mentioned in the beginning that, we have this humongous vacancy, in terms of the SEZ projects which were built and which are lying vacant right now. So I want you to touch upon the MSM REIT legislation a little bit and then the DESH policy and try to understand how the DESH policy will change the outlook for the SEZ space part of it at least, hoping if they get everything right in the legislation. And the MSM REIT, how this will work on the, like what Sumit was saying, the standalone buildings which are being now reconverted or repurposed for occupants. So how that will help the fractal operation, platforms.
So, the MSM REIT concept is, I think we've seen fractional ownership platforms. It's
Right.
more like a tech platform where you bring together small retail investors like you and me. The ticket size is 20-25 lakhs. A standalone commercial property is acquired and it's owned by the SPV. You hold a equity share or a debenture instrument. And there's an asset management company which manages it. These platforms were not getting regulated by any specific regulations per se, and more to bring them under the regulatory environment, bring in some kind of a governance and compliance and investor protection. I think that's where the MSM REIT as a concept came up. It's pretty much similar to how it is being currently operated, but they're giving it a color of a REIT, in which case each of these assets can go under a scheme of a REIT and they need to be listed. Today, I think if you see most of these fractional ownership platforms, it's not necessary that the promoter holds some stake in these platforms.
Right.
One of the key requirements in MSM REIT is that you need to have skin in the game, and therefore the sponsor needs to hold investment in each of these assets, and therefore the number of schemes that the REIT will have, that much of investment the sponsor needs to have. If you look at from an investor standpoint, definitely MSM REIT will give, in fact, open the door for much more larger set of investors.
Right.
Today it is limited to small, knowledgeable investors who know that this concept exists. With a listed MSM REIT, it's like any other retail investor, right?
Right.
So from an investor standpoint, definitely it's good to have. One of the key requirements that they have there is that all the existing fractional ownership platforms need to migrate to MSM REIT.
Right.
And that's mandatory. If it doesn't happen, then you just wind down the structure. I think that is where there's a need to relook at the structure, because they were never conceptualized with this requirement in mind, that you need to have a 15% sponsor
Right.
requirement. And it needs to get mandatorily listed. So moving these SPVs under a MSM REIT, there needs to be some kind of tax neutrality, because they are holding real estate assets, so valuation rules come into play. So that needs to be set right, and it's not going to die down, definitely. In fact, it will bring in more such platforms under MSM REIT. It's just a matter of time of how these structures migrate into that new system. On the Desh, Sanjay touched upon that there's a lot of vacant space lying in the SEZs. I guess 60% of SEZ is ITITS.
Right.
The SEZ, the inventory that got built up was mainly on 2 or 3 counts, right? One is IT sector was booming. 2, you had tax incentives. The MAT provisions were introduced, sunset clause came in. So it kind of didn't appeal beyond a point.
Right. I think the sunset clause also didn't help it.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. At the same time, I don't know if you all recollect, there was this national manufacturing policy that came out somewhere in 2014.
Correct.
That envisioned national investment manufacturing zones, basically to promote manufacture. Even that didn't take off for any takeoff. And Desh kind of tries to combine both.
Okay.
You have services as well as enterprise, and different hubs for services and enterprise. And to promote this domestic usage, they want to do away with net foreign exchange requirement. I think that, and there has to be some fiscal incentive, right, for you to move in these zones. So 15% of tax rate. Those are the 2 points where there's a disconnect, and,
Right.
and I think we are waiting for that to get resolved.
So looking at Desh, yeah, please.
Throw some light. I can throw some light on this very quickly. First of all, while the Desh was discussed, now what's happening really is they're making amendments to the existing act.
That's right.
So the existing act under Ministry of Commerce and Finance, they've agreed to the concept that all the existing SEZs who have actually served their purpose of 10 to 15 years of giving an environment where occupiers could benefit, there would not be any implication. You can do unit by unit or flow by flow denotification.
Right.
So there is an agreement there. The new SEZs who probably did not create enough employment or provided, I think they'll be right back of tax benefits that they have availed.
Right.
So the government will actually benefit from the right backs.
Correct.
The third aspect is, if this 30 to 40 million square feet which is lying vacant, if it's given to domestic, there is a GST that the government will earn.
Right.
So I think they finally got it. It's now waiting for a release.
Right.
And it may just happen in time.
So that's an interesting point. So strata-wise denotification can happen, which means the growth of fractal ownership platforms can be even better, because that becomes an opportunity for them. So I can look at Desh as a very adaptive policy, coming to commercial real estate, pushing adaptive repurposing of buildings. So Girish, for you, is that this adaptive repurposing of the assets that you're talking at, how does this drive the ROEs when you look at investing in such projects? And more from a sustainability angle, because a lot of occupiers and developers talk about how they're benefiting from sustainability. But funds, how are they actually making money from that?
Okay, let me first address the sustainability point first. And in fact, I would like to make an economic case for it, not a greenwashing or why it should have. And there are actually many reasons why ESG actually works and people are actually waking up to that. And there are actually 3-4 reasons. One is if your building is ESG compliant, or if your building is, let's say, the green building. A green building is a building which has some form of green rating. Could be IGBC, could be USGBC. If your building is ESG compliant, you have the potential to attract better tenants. Thereby, those companies can attract better talent and thereby actually pay better rents to you. So in fact, there was a stat which said that green buildings or buildings which are ESG compliant have potential to charge anywhere between 4 to 10% of rental premium. So you get better tenants, you get rental premium. That's on the revenue side. Look at the cost side. If you actually make your HVAC systems or compliant, you'll actually save on the energy cost. So there are a lot of studies which have shown that the lifetime cost of equipment are actually lower. You will get operating efficiencies. And of course, it's required. As Sanjay was mentioning, if you don't do all these things, you will not even participate in an RFP. So A, it is required. B, you'll get higher revenue. And C, you'll get lower cost. So it's clearly win-win for everyone. And both the tenants, investors, and the developers want this now. In fact, globally, there are multiple organizations who are actually moving the net zero targets, like Sanjay mentioned. India has, I think, 2030 or 2040. The path which a global organization actually imposing on newer buildings actually more stringent. The challenge which we are facing is, because the grid today is totally coal-based and non-renewable, how do you greenify your buildings when you actually generate? Which is why the solution remains that you get credits and you actually try to greenify it.
Right. So, Sumit, like Girish was saying that, sustainability is an important format. But for flex space operators, the standard of metrics is no longer occupancy, but more of footfalls, how many people are actually using the space, which means a lot of mapping of the carbon footprint and things like that. How is this impacting the way you look at this, the investment into tech that tracks all this, because IT and OT are important cost factors for you. And then, because that is happening, how is it at the back end impacting a developer? And how you both are talking to each other and using that as a metric?
So, see, in terms of, one is the aspect around on a green building, but then the second is what we do is as a tenant and an occupier in that building is doing fit outs over there. Now, we do are quite conscious with respect to the level of fit outs we do in terms of, using sustainable materials, low VOC paints, so all those, industry standards, everyone, ends up following. And it has become more like a hygiene now that we end up doing it, because an occupier who comes to our kind of, at least I can talk about top 5 or 6 operators in the country, they're expecting that we'll be following those sustainability measures.
Sanjay, again, coming from this adaptive practices, we have seen a lot of challenges internationally, the adaptive practices happen, especially with buildings which have kind of outlived their purposes, like what we were talking about in the SEZs, right? So there is a lot of case studies how they need, the entire readaptive use itself will significantly throw up a lot of carbon footprint, and how that has to be offset, and a lot of issues are there on that. What are that we are learning from those examples, and how are we implementing the solutions they are looking at in India today?
We were the first real estate development company to identify certain areas. One area was, beside the renewable energy, was district cooling. Cooling is basically 60% of the energy consumption of a building. And if the cooling is not done individually, which is what most of the people and developers do in India,
right,
we set up a district cooling plant servicing all the buildings together. So that gave us a 30% reduction in energy cost. Then we started working on recycling, treatment of water, and the waste management, which looks trivial when you start and insignificant in the larger scheme of things. But everybody knows that we all use tankers now in our residential or commercial properties. Right. So you actually pay for water.
Right.
But if you have really quality treatment equipment and management expertise, you can actually save over a period of time. So when you combine these areas, the third element is design. we started designing buildings with 16-meter to 18-meter grid, which basically means no column in the entire 50,000 square feet floor plate.
Okay.
Which means, I mean, there is column, of course, but they're hidden in the wall and the core of the building.
Right.
So when you do that, you do densification of a building. So in the same carpet area, we could add 10 to 12% more seating capacity without increasing the carpet area, because the interior architects could densify the layout.
Right.
So we started saying, one is this. So the second in the design component is we are very labor intensive. Most of our parks, a 4 million square feet park requires 240 people to manage in 3 shifts.
Okay.
Okay? Now, if you design the park in such a way that the resource allocation is comparatively lower, the ingress, the outgress, the facial recognition, the peak hour traffic is managed with less people, so the operation cost goes down.
Right.
Right? So this is design input. Then comes the maintenance and management expertise. So if you design and do permanent finishes and technology and features which give you longevity, your overall reduction can be substantial.
Right.
So we did a math with some client where they were actually going to a brand new building in Chennai, developed by a very prominent developer, and our building was 12 years old.
Okay.
So they actually paid 7 rupees per square feet more rent to come into our building,
Right.
because they could seat more, and what we call mostly is a rent per square feet became a discussion as cost per seat.
Right. Right.
So I think it was an eye-opener for most. So what we call in Tata Realty is that we are no longer a development company. We are a services organization in a development space.
Okay.
You know.
So the last question here is for you, Pratik. So a development company thinking from a services perspective. So from a services perspective, I'm going to ask you, like, you guys were pioneers in driving adaptive reuse of buildings, because not just you, many other flex players usually like to take up space in buildings which are not used and, spruce it up and then, turn it into a lively community space. How do you see that changing the commercial real estate landscape going forward? Because 14% of today's real estate leasing is being driven by you. So how do you see that going in future?
I think flex operators have pivoted to create a seamless interactive experience from the first touch point of space acquisition to delivery to space management, and hence are at the forefront of changing how buildings and the human-built environment interaction are being redefined. Today, gone are the days when I've said this before. Real estate is not about just providing a workstation and a chair. To Sanjay's point, right? It's a services industry. Hospitality-driven, highly amenitized spaces are not the end game anymore, but are the starting line.
Right.
There's a general preference for buildings that are ESG compliant, well certified, and provide maximum amenities. The pandemic has accelerated the demand for technology and innovation in the real estate industry. Sustainability again is a key criteria, and it's higher among the larger occupiers. So yeah, I think.
Yeah. So thanks for that. So the time is up. So thanks a lot, panel, for giving insights into this particular thing. So just a couple of takeaways is that commercial real estate no longer is the traditional build and transfer it to occupants. It's becoming more of a services-focused kind of a space for developers. Importantly, if you want to be relevant going forward. I think also a lot more dialogue will start happening with the flex space operators as they become your important occupants in the next couple of years. And I think investors are no longer passive. They're becoming more and more active, and they're looking to see how they can enhance returns from these investments by providing insights and industry changing trends being brought into India. So thanks a lot for that. If there are any question answers for the panel, we would like to take it up. Thank you.
So if we have any questions, you would like to raise your hand, we'll pass the mic to you. Do we have any questions? I believe not. I think it's a well-executed panel. You know, that's the way I would always say it, yeah? Would you like to contribute something?
I don't know if it's a well-executed panel. I sure know it's a very tough panel to sit in after lunch.
No, but on that note, thank you so much to all our eminent panelists. May we request you to be on the stage as we're going to be requesting someone to join us and help us with the felicitation. So could I now have the founder of Propacity, if we could have Uday Vansh Malik to kindly join us and help us in the felicitation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a warm, warm round of applause, Uday. Thank you. And could we now have the mementos being passed? First up, thank you so much, Shabala, for joining us and being a part of our panel. We request both of you for a photograph individually. If you could step in the center, both of you. Ma'am, one by one. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, a warm, warm round of applause. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining us and contributing on this panel. We immensely value your knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, Sanjay, Dutt. Thank you, Pratik. Thank you for joining us on this panel. Thank you so much, Girish, for contributing on the conclave today. Thank you, Sumit. Thank you for being a part of the panel and contributing with your knowledge. And thank you so much, Ajay, for curating this panel discussion and helping us to get the maximum knowledge out of all our panelists. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause for Ajay. Thank you so much. With that, Uday and the entire panel, we request you one final bit for the group photograph. You know, I have to tick all the boxes before the panel leaves. So we'll just request you to step forward, the entire panel. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big, big round of applause. What an exciting and an engaging panel discussion this has turned out to be. Thank you to each and every panelist.